Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel for the Payday 3 news update, and we're bringing back an old recurring feature from Payday 3's launch, the Payday 3 livestream PDF note analysis. I never really gave it a title, but basically today we had the live stream I mentioned to you all last week where Almir went on stream actually with acting CEO Juhl, and they both talked about Payday 3's future and Starbreeze's future and a lot of the feedback from the quarterly report we got last week that basically confirmed Payday 3 was getting far less funding and far less support than it had been throughout year one, and basically making it sound as though Payday 3, despite being claimed to be a priority, was not really going to be in execution. And today they've talked about a good chunk of that. I think it's important to share that there are still some things they clearly haven't talked about. For example, the layoffs. I brought it up in their stream to get them to actually acknowledge it, because nowhere in Starbreeze have they actually mentioned that they've laid off staff in the process. I've found these things out from seeing LinkedIn posts and having devs contact me, and I do think it's a little bit shady that Starbreeze refused to even acknowledge it publicly. So I did bring that up. That is later down here, but Almir and Matt's both talk a little bit about the quarterly report. A lot of things, I'll be honest, were danced around. It felt very much like we can't really answer that, and some of it felt like it had good reasons, some of it really didn't, in my opinion, but I do think you can make some connections between some of the things they've talked about and some of the things they didn't talk about, and poke a few holes here and there, and overall just give some general thoughts about the stream. So that's what I'm here to do today. If you are new to the channel, or you find yourself coming back on the regular, please do consider clicking that subscribe button. I greatly appreciate it. Also, I think I can hear it in my voice if I do sound a bit more lower tone than normal. I've got some kind of virus. I'm really not feeling very well. I got out of bed purely to watch this stream and make this video, and will probably go back to bed as soon as it's up, so if I don't reply to comments quickly, still leave all your thoughts down below. I'll check them at some point. But yeah, let's get through this PDF so I can get this video out to you all and see what you all think. So, as I said, Matt's the acting CEO, joined Almir on the stream. He confirmed he's been with the company since the reconstruction, so roughly 5 years now. Matt claims to be happy the quarterly report got so much attention. I don't really believe that personally, considering how much chaos there was in the Payday fanbase, but I mean, whatever, that could just be something he's saying, just be like, oh, well, you know, I'm glad we can talk about it, whatever. But he said the interpretation towards it was that they were closing down the game, which is the first thing that I didn't love, because unless I've missed something on the Reddit or in the comment sections, I've not seen anyone say that the interpretation was that they were closing down the game. The interpretation was that they were putting Payday 3 effectively in the dust because they weren't giving it the time and resources it needed, so that would in turn kill it off. It wasn't that they were making a swift decision now to kill it, it was that it was looking like they were treating it like they wanted it to die. But he does talk a bit about the funding. Now, one point I've seen a lot of people share since last week's news is that the significantly lower level of investment is purely them reducing the funding they had for Operation Medic Bag. It's a fair point. It could well be they put so much money into Operation Medic Bag in year one that as a result, removing that is a significantly lower level of investment. I don't personally believe that, and I think the delays of the updates the day after this was put out further proves they don't really know what they're doing with the update cadence yet, and there's further points to talk about that later. But I definitely do think they would lose funding into year two. I expected that from the get-go. They talked about it about 6 months ago and said that as Operation Medic Bag came to an end, some funding would be pulled from the game, because naturally they had to overinvest in Payday 3 to try and make it what the game should have been at launch. That's fair. I think it's this significant level of investment cuts that's the bigger problem. It's not that it was cut at all, it's how much it was cut. But it does just confirm that, you know, it's the Operation Medic Bag level funding that's being removed, but doesn't really go further beyond that. And again, I'd like to remind you all that this stream was very much a damage control stream. I'm not trying to be a pessimist here, I'm not trying to assume the worst, I'm trying to keep realistic with all of you, because you have to remember, this is the CEO of a company coming on a stream to talk about their company being perceived badly. It's going to be very much damage control, it's very much going to be telling you the things you want to hear. That does not mean everything he's saying is a lie, but it also means that he doesn't necessarily have to tell you everything that is truthful and honest. There could be things they know in the studio right now they're not telling you, there could be things that are being twisted, there also might not be. All I'm saying is, keep an open mind. Read what he said, bear in mind what he said, but also bear in mind what they don't say. Very important, and that's why I'm making this video, because I think it's good to just kind of talk through some of this stuff. They do mention a bit about the publicly traded nature of Starbreeze and some of the regulations to that. I'm not really sure why I wrote this down, it doesn't really make a great deal of difference. They do clarify that the messages are meant to be for investors though, which does confirm a point that I made in Thursday's video, which is that the wording and presentation of the stuff in these reports is very much so the investors are happy. So they won't mention that the last update for Payday 3 had loads of bugs that still haven't been fixed, because to an investor that's not important. To an investor it's, we added the key features the players kept begging us for. This shows you that we listen to our players. and that's all they need to say. I think I heard him say almost 35,000 people have shares in the company. I might have misheard that, but that's a lot. Certainly defining publicly traded right there. He then also says he wasn't aware Payday fans read the reports, which I thought was interesting because I've read them for a long time, even though I've not always understood them, and I have to give credit to Nobly because occasionally I do drop a message and go, what does this bit mean? Because finances are just not really my strong suit, at least the financial wordings, I should say. Maths is fine, but when you start talking about EBITDA, I don't know what the hell you're talking about, so I appreciate him helping me on those occasionally. But yeah, some of us have been looking through these for a while. I think it's just because there was such a fuss now that they've realised, oh wow, they really do look at these. But they've said they will keep it in mind going forward, which is interesting, and I do like that, because the insinuation, especially from Almir there, was that if a report's going to say something that's going to sound, quite bad for the community, they're going to try and, make sure that players find out the right way and not the wrong way. Now, they do say they can't share plans before the reports come out, but maybe that means if the next report says something that might be concerning to fans, at the same time, Payday 3 might put a statement out. If they do, great. That would be getting ahead of the curve and avoiding, hopefully, some chaos, but who knows? We'll see what happens there. Now, here's my first big problem, and I mentioned a little bit about this earlier. Matt did confirm that morale was quite high. He was also asked how his day has been. I mean, Almir was just picking out some very basic questions that really were not necessary for this stream. I love the guy, but that is a critique I would have there, where he's saying, it's great to be in the office every day. Morale is really high. I don't believe that, and I think anyone who has even a sense of knowledge about what's been happening can see through that immediately, because it can't be high. If you've laid off staff in your office within the last week, staff who, as I've argued in my previous videos, have messaged me confused, not expecting to be laid off and not knowing why the hell it's happened, then you can't tell me morale in the studio is high. They'll have lost colleagues, they will have lost friends, and they're having to trudge on knowing the community is extremely worried for the future of Payday 3. So that is just a flat out lie, and I didn't like that, and that was why I called them out on it specifically. I put it in the chat, and to be fair, everyone in the chat suddenly started backing it, which I think was why they had to bring it out. So I do appreciate Almir and Matt's actually responding to it. But here's the response that Matt said. I tried to write down as much of what he said, so everything here is almost completely quoted. I've tried to quote it as best I can, but I was speed typing. So he said, having people leave isn't something you want. That impacts morale, but there is also a situation where being in a company that isn't so big, running Baxter and Payday as projects, we can't always move people between the projects because competence doesn't always fit. It's never a good situation to be in. If we've been bigger and had more projects, we could mitigate it, but we can't, so we need to do a competence check. I'm really sorry, but it's something we need to do to be efficient, to do the best we can for each project, but we need to move on to the future now. Granted, on the fly, not a bad answer. I'll give him credit there. That's not a bad answer, but I'm just of that mind, and, call me cynical, but I don't think layoffs are ever that necessary. In the last 2 years, if you look at the layoffs that we've had from companies, a lot of them feel extremely unnecessary, and that CEOs and higher-ups will claim that it's the only thing they could do. I have not believed that for a long time. There are certain cases where it happens and you kind of go, right, fine, whatever. But especially in today's market, I think you need to be working harder to make sure people don't lose their jobs. And I'm not convinced from this response they did everything they could. It feels like, as I've said, they've moved people from Payday 3's team to Baxter's, which is something he does talk about later, I will bring up. But they've moved people they can, and then when people haven't worked with that vision, rather than putting them on a specific team that might work, they just laid them off. That's the impression it gives to me. So whether that's the case or not, whatever, that's my opinion. I'm sharing that as an opinion. It's not objective fact. I just don't love it. And I also think that part of the reason I don't love it is because the only reason he talked about this was because I brought it up in the chat and everyone said, yeah, actually, you need to talk about this. The fact Starbreeze haven't actually acknowledged those layoffs, I think is incredibly unprofessional. I know they don't have to talk about it, but even companies that have had loads of complaints towards them, like Activision doing layoffs, Bungie doing layoffs, things have been talked about regardless. They need to be. If they're not talked about and people find out the hard way, it doesn't reflect well on the company, at least not to me. When they were asked about what less investment entails, they said they used external partners to help with certain aspects of developing the game, but they won't be doing that going into year 2. They say they don't plan to become fewer people in the company, which, I mean, again, was another reason I called them out, because that wasn't, I mean, what do you mean they don't plan to have fewer people? You already have fewer people. You've already facilitated that. But then in terms of the size of the team in year 2, which to be fair is a piece of information I would love to know, Matt says that they don't ever really talk about team size. But he then says it's not really about the team size. Doesn't matter if it's 20 people or 80 people, but the staff and budget has now been set for year 2. Those numbers could be random. They could be intentional. Maybe there are only 20 people working on Payday 3 right now. I hope not, because that would not be nearly enough staff, regardless of what they say about smaller teams being better. But the 80 people, to me, kind of lines up with what they might have had when he joined the company. That's why I wonder if those numbers were intentionally chosen, but I don't know. Again, speculation there. Anyway, after saying that they have staff and budget set for year 2, they have their team allocated now, they have their budget allocated now, they don't have a full plan for year 2 yet. They know they're going to do more content and heists, but they can't say if it's the same amount, and they claim it's for flexibility. But these just seem like they're saying what they can to reassure people, but then not provide the evidence to back it up. Don't worry, we have a staff set, we have a budget set, we have teams allocated for what we're going to do. What are we going to do? Good question, said the Shrek gif. They do say that for year 2 DLC's content will be priced accordingly, which will build upon year 1 feedback and DLC pricing, etc. But the big thing, and this is the real thing that I want to talk about, and it'll probably be its own section in this video, is the biggest confirmation that I don't think everyone really clocked because they kind of just mentioned it on the fly. Don't really blame them. Almir confirms they are not getting the money back from Payday 3 that they're putting into it. So the budget they're putting into the game, they're not seeing back in game or DLC sales. How much so? Well, Matt's made a comment not long after that confirmed it even more. He said Payday 3 hasn't made any profit. I guess that means from development right through year 1, so all the money they put into Payday 3, because they did claim that 9 days into Payday 3's launch they'd recouped development costs. So after that you would expect they'd have made profit. Either it's the case that people refunded the game so much that that became untrue after Payday 3's launch, or they've put so much money in since year 1 has elapsed that they've not made the sales back and now the money they spent has vastly outnumbered the money they've got in. Could be either or both of those things, but having the confirmation that Payday 3 is not a profitable game is kind of a sobering thought, and it does lead credence as to why they would want to cut down team and investment, because why keep funding something that's not doing well? That is very much a business stance, and it does make sense. I don't like it, because that then, as again, leads credence to Payday 3 getting less attention, despite them claiming it's their top priority. For me, I understand the sticky situation that they're in finance-wise, that makes it a little bit clearer, but it doesn't make it any better as a Payday fan, because to me that screams that they're starting to worry that it's not worth the investment. At least the reasoning is beginning to show, even if it's not good. But again, these things could be talked about in more detail and be more honest. If they're going to share it in a stream, they could put it in a company statement, and it's something I'm going to talk about more later. I think this would have been better as a post they could read out on stream, because then you could go over the details more specifically. But Mats does know that they want Payday 3 to be able to stand on its own legs, and they confirm that not all of Payday's money is being funneled straight into Baxter. It sounds very much as though they want to funnel all of Payday 3's money into Payday and then extra into Baxter, but they're getting so little of it that they can't really funnel the profits in any particular direction. They're having to put up extra money to fund Payday 3 right now because it's doing so badly financially that they can't just run it off its own profits, which is obviously not good at all. Editing Troy jumping in with one of 2 little interjections I've got in this video, but I realised I didn't actually touch on the Digital Bros thing that I've put on the screen. Basically just Matt says that because they haven't turned a profit, they've not paid the Digital Bros thing, which if you didn't see last week's videos, there was something that came out as a result of the return of Connor Sherry Shaw's Payday content, albeit briefly for 2 videos, first one's out now. But in that video, they do state that they found something in Payday 3's finances and Starbreeze's finances that a third of all Payday 3 profits need to be paid to the parent company of 505 Games, Digital Bros, until they receive $40 million. So Payday 3 needs to make $120 million profit and then pay a third of that to Digital Bros. Because they've not turned any profit, they haven't paid any of that to Digital Bros. Is that some kind of problem internally from company-wise? Are Digital Bros going to have a problem with that? I don't know. Connor speculated that there might be. I don't personally know which way it will go, so I won't say there, but Matt does mention it. That's the context as to why he shares Payday 3 hasn't made a profit. But the actual fact that it hasn't made a profit, I thought was far more interesting and, unfortunately, far more damning. Another comment on the significantly lower investment, Matt does say that they did things behind the scenes nobody noticed, and that was part of the investment. Of course, he doesn't say what those things are, so it could be anything, but he did mention it, so I thought it was interesting to bring up. Almir said there's no new details on Armor 2.0. If you remember, that's the Armor overhaul system, which was targeted for December. He said if it's not ready in December, Almir doesn't want to release it in December. He said if it takes an extra month, 2 months, or 6 months, it will take that long. That's all it's going to be. So he's very much preparing you, I believe, for a delay, because they've already delayed what I assume to be the free heist. I don't think that was meant to come out in December, call it a gut feeling. And they've already delayed the paid character pack to early 2025. Need I remind you, they didn't say January, they said early 2025, so a 2-month gap is more than a possibility. So I think they're trying to brace you for the fact that Armor 2.0 won't make it for December. I personally don't think that's going to happen. As for the Unreal 5 engine update, I think this was the most damning answer towards it that I've seen. Rather than just it's coming in 2025 now, Almir started by saying, well, I wouldn't say it's cancelled, which is very much a thing that suggests it is cancelled, but Almir said it's a question of priorities. What can they manage? So I'm going to say flat out right now, don't expect the Unreal 5 engine upgrade. It's just not going to happen. I don't think personally. But Almir then says he doesn't want to comment on update cadence because he wants to protect the team. Very much his attitude towards not sharing a roadmap for Payday 3's second year. He doesn't want to lock things in with the team so that they feel unnecessary pressures. I understand that. I don't think the team deserves to be put under any pressure, especially with layoffs on the horizon and their colleagues and friends being laid off. but I wonder if there's a bigger reason to that, and I will get to that in a moment, as I've said. In response to a question that said you need to ensure the community that Payday 3 isn't forgotten, Matt said that Payday is the company's backbone, and that it will be their main focus in the future. They aren't moving people away from Payday into Baxter. That's something he said. They are not moving people away from Payday into Baxter. Now, let's just really go into semantics here. They're not moving people. That's probably true. Do you know why that's probably true? Because it's already been done. The layoffs have already happened, and any restructuring they were doing in the studio has already been completed. That is very clever wording from a CEO, a very smart businessman, who, regardless of whether we approve or disapprove of his decisions, has chosen that wording, in my opinion, extraordinarily carefully so that he isn't lying. Because that probably is true, but they've already done the restructuring. We know that Payday 3 has a smaller team now, and I said I've seen 4 people been laid off. I don't know if there's any more because Starbreeze haven't spoken about it, but that's not very many people, even though all the layoffs are bad, and I stand by that, and I wish they'd talk about it more. 4 people, say that it was a maximum of, I don't know, 10 people. Beyond what I've seen here, I have been looking into it and trying to find more, and I've not seen any just yet. But that's not enough to reconstitute a team reshuffle. I genuinely believe that Payday 3 getting a smaller team is because they're pushing people into Baxter. I can understand as a company why they're doing that. Like I said, if Payday 3 is not making the funding that they need, then they're trying to push into Baxter. I can see why they think that's the best way forward. I don't agree that it's the best way forward, but I can empathise with why they've done it. And so I think they've already moved the people so that he can say right now, well, we're not going to move any more because, well, the Payday 3 team's already really small now. Why move anyone else over? Very much comes across like that. Editing Troy here. I was just going through the video and I actually realised there's even more evidence that Mats is lying here, because if you actually look at his answer about the layoffs, he says that when you move staff between projects, competence doesn't always fit, and that's why people have been laid off. So they have moved people. That was very choice wording so that you didn't worry about more people being moved, because they've already been moved. That was a rug pull. Another lie. There may not be tons here, but that is a big one, and I don't like it. That is definitely misleading people, and I'm not a fan. Almir again brings up the update cadence, but says the exact same thing. He knows it's a big problem, but doesn't really have anything to share, but he does say specifically, until we can tell you otherwise, the 4 to 6 week or monthly-ish frequency for updates is what you can still expect. I don't believe the evidence we've had so far agrees with that, and again, time will tell. Time's the biggest revealer of these things. How often the updates release going forward and what's in them will prove it more than what Almir says here, but I don't know if I believe that personally. But on top of that, he then finishes with something that actually did make me quite happy. He said that modifiers should not be forced upon you, should be able to choose, so maybe down the line they'll actually make the modifiers in Payday 3 optional, which would be a win. I'd very much appreciate that. So, as you can see, overall, not a lot was said in here. I think there's a couple of interesting points, specifically sharing Payday 3 hasn't made any profit. I'm very glad they actually answered my question about layoffs, because it really seemed like they were just going to ignore it. But here are my concluding points, and let me talk about them in a bit more detail with you. So first off, my opinion of it, it did feel a bit corporate-y and damage control-y. I think that's just by its very nature. It's not necessarily Almir's fault. I don't think it's his fault at all, really. But I think that it's clearly there because they saw the complaints and wants to talk about it. I don't think it was done as well as it could have been. As I say in the bottom part, I think what would have been a better idea is if they'd made a company statement, listed key points, explained key stances, and then had that as a baseline. Because Almir said in the stream, Mats wasn't even meant to be there for more than 15 minutes, but he just stuck around and they kept answering questions. Does that mean that it would have gone very differently and they would have talked about more specific things if Mats had been there for the allotted time? We don't know. If you have a company statement with set things to talk about, then everyone going into the stream knows what you're going to cover. If you don't have that, the stream doesn't really know what you're going to talk about, and they may think that this was all you're going to say, but maybe you were going to say more. Having that transparency is important, and these streams have done that before. There have been blog posts that Starbreeze have decided to bring up on stream and read through and talk through the community with, and I think that's been really useful. The stream shouldn't be the primary source of information. I said this at launch last year, because that's why my videos did so well at the time, because people don't have time to watch streams and pick out tiny bits of information from an hour of Q&A, where some questions are as unnecessary as, how's your day going, Mats? Because that wasn't needed. If you make a statement, everyone can read that, everyone can get the core gist, but if you want to hear the bigger explanations, you watch the stream. That would make more sense to me, and why they're not doing it still, I really do not understand. But there are several things, such as the slower updates from these delays we've already heard, but the refusal to comment on the cadence changing, and also saying that the budget is locked in for year 2, but they seem very much as though they have absolutely no plans as to what specifically they're going to do. I do not believe, personally, things are going to be the same as year 1, minus Operation Medibag level changes. In my heart of hearts, from from everything they're saying and connecting these dots together, from what Almir's saying, from what Max is saying, and what we've seen last week that wasn't talked about today or wasn't covered enough, because like I said, bear in mind what they did talk about and what they didn't, I don't personally believe we can rely on monthly updates to Payday 3 in year 2. Time will tell. I'd love to be proven wrong. I've said this to you already. But we're supposed to have this hotfix update this month, then the heist next month, and a character in early 2025. Let's see how that time frame works. Let's see when the hotfix drops. Let's see when the heist drops. Let's see when the character drops. And then we can begin to judge. And then it won't just be me telling you what I think, or the CEO telling you what either he thinks or what you want to hear, whichever one it may have been. We'll actually have some actions to back up the words. So we'll find out there. I'm just saying I don't personally feel reassured from that stream, but I don't think any of us went into expecting to be. But I do just want to talk a little bit more, like I said, about Almir's comments about pressuring the devs, because he says he doesn't want to pressure the devs. They're not locking in update frequency. They're not locking in content plans. They're not locking in a roadmap. And he says he wants to protect the team. And I do believe him. I really do. That guy cares about Payday. He cares about his team. He cares about how Payday is received and the people working on it, whether they're happy, upset, all of that. He's a really good guy, and I thoroughly believe that. But I don't believe that's the only reason they're not talking about it. Because, again, this reduced staff on the team, this reduced budget, I don't believe it lines up with just bringing an end to Operation Medic Bag. Everything we're seeing so far screams to a larger problem that's going on. And to some people, they'll be watching this video and thinking I'm putting holes in things that don't exist. And you know what? I really appreciate if you feel that way. I understand it. But to me, there are too many alarm signs that are blaring in the background that when you put them together, they paint a wider picture of Payday 3's future. And I do think a lot of you in my comments have seen that too. So I'm going to be interested to see if you feel the same after this video as well. But I think Almir really does want to prioritize Payday and his team, but I think the people above Almir have other priorities. Like I said, I really can understand the financial choices behind what they're doing, because if Payday 3 is not turning that profit, why would you put tons more in? I get that. Year 1 is going to be a very interesting look back for Payday 3, because it was a chance for Starbreeze to get people back on board with Payday 3 and get people playing the game again and prove that Payday 3 can last. And unfortunately, an argument that I made last year was that gamers generally, again, as cringy as a term that is, gamers don't have the same attention spans that they had 10 years ago. People talk about how Payday 2 launched terribly, but it made its way back over time. Back then, we didn't have social media apps where you would listen to someone read out a Reddit post while watching Subway Surfers on the same screen. People don't have the attention spans that they used to. If you aren't enjoying something, or you're not really attracted to something after a little bit, you move on, you find something else. That's the nature of our society. And I think, unfortunately, Payday 3's not had the increase in players and sales that Starbreeze wanted in year 1, and this is what we're getting as a result. That's all this screams to me. If we'd had bigger player jumps, if we'd had bigger DLC sales throughout year 1, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I genuinely don't think so. Maybe they'd have cut back the budget still, because like I said, you can't keep up that Operation Medic Bag funding forever. It makes sense. I'm glad they put that money in to add those key features, but I don't think we'd have been seeing as significant of a cut in budget and staff that we would have done otherwise had Payday 3 been doing better. To me, that's what this is indicative of. Payday 3 has not made back the money and the players that they've wanted in year 1, and they're now having to behave accordingly. I do think if Payday 3 suddenly does see a huge improve, things could change and they may adapt and they may put more into Payday 3. But as a business, they've got to only put in the investment that matches what they're getting out of it. Ideally, they get more out of it than they invest in. That's how a business works. So until Payday 3 can do that, I don't expect things to be very quick for this game. I think they're going to try and put out as much as they can. I don't think it'll be nearly as frequent, but if they can't get the people back to prove it, they can't put out updates quickly. I think it's genuinely as simple as that. Okay, I lied. Third editing comment coming in here, but don't mistake me, because there's one thing I don't think I've said enough in this video as I finish it off. I still don't want them to push the money into Baxter. Yes, Payday 3 is not turning a profit for them, but really, Payday 3 is the best choice they've got. I stand by the fact that Baxter is too big of a gamble that they can't deliver on, and it will just continue a cycle. They try and push money into something else that doesn't work, and then have to fall back on Payday anyway. Just make Payday 3 the game you promised players it would be from the start, rather than start to head us there in year 1, and then put the brakes right as things are starting to get better, because you'll release content that's still so broken you have to wait months for it to actually work as intended, and at the same time, you release more content that's still broken. There are ways to make this better, and pushing everything to Baxter is not it, regardless of how badly Payday 3 is performing financially. As far as I'm concerned, if I was in their position, even though I understand them wanting to move to Baxter, the overall decision for me would be to just try and push everything in Payday 3. That would be the best call, because how are you going to invest in future games from Starbreeze if the previous 3 releases, Raid World War II, Overkill's The Walking Dead, and Payday 3, all flopped at launch and never really made their way back? Not in any notable way, anyway. I just think it's going to be very hard for Starbreeze to pull it back. I think it's still a terrible choice, regardless of the actual logic I see now from their finances. finances. This stream didn't say a lot, but I feel like there's quite a few conclusions you can make, and those are mine. I think things aren't quite as high morale as the CEO claims to be. They're going to say that they want you to think things are okay, even if they're not. I think the layoffs still not being talked about is a real shame. I think the company really could do with making a proper, full-depth statement they can share that everyone can read without watching the stream, so you don't have to rely on me reporting it via a PDF piece of content. But I don't believe Payday 3 is going to die from this one choice like tomorrow. I never said that from the start. I said this was a decision that felt like they were abandoning Payday 3 because they had hope on Baxter, and that is still the case. All that I see now is that there's actual financial logic to back it up based on what they've said. It's not just Payday 3 is not doing so well, screw it, they'll care about Baxter more, because I would hope that they know that we don't do that. I hope they would know that audience overlap doesn't exist, because as we've proven previously, the Payday 2 audience didn't jump to Overkill's The Walking Dead, they didn't jump to Raid World War II. Some did, but nowhere near enough. So the idea they jumped to a completely different stylistic game like Baxter, they can't be that clueless to think that everyone's going to want to do that. That was what didn't make a lot of sense to me. It felt like there was no real logic going on. At least I can see there's some via the finances. Still don't believe it's the most logical thing, but I can understand the background of it now. And I hope that going through this and explaining some of it to you has hopefully made it a bit easier to understand for you guys. If I get anything wrong or I hear any countering reports, as always, I will leave a pinned comment below this video to let you know about any corrections. So please, I encourage you to check that, especially if you're checking this video out a few days on. If there's no pinned comment, then, well, I've not heard anything. But remember, of course, as always, this is me sharing the news in the stream and then offering my own thoughts on it. So what I've written down is what's been said, bar this bit, because this is obviously my thoughts. Everything else I've said beyond is my speculation, my opinions based on everything I've seen. I hope that my word is enough for a lot of you to trust and understand that I'm making these conclusions as logically as I can. I know there are still people out there who think that I'm not trustworthy because I recommended Payday 3 at launch. Fine, you know, I mean, you will think what you want to think. As I said previously, I already immensely regret how all of that went down, and I've been doing my absolute best to stay as objective as I can now and talk about what's actual fact. It's why I'm not hyping up updates and why I'm trying to stay realistic. It's up to you in the end of the day whether you believe what I say or not, but either way, the PDF shows the facts. I'm interested to know what you all think about it, so please let me know in the comment section down below what you think about the stream today, and just generally the vibe in the Payday community following on from last week. As I've said, the biggest reveal now will be time. How things go over the next 6 months, 12 months for year 2, how often we get updates, how big they are, what content's within them. If we get updates every month, are they to the same extent as the previous ones? If we get updates every 2 months, are they proportionate to counteract the fact that we're not getting them every month? We'll find out. We will genuinely have to just see what happens. But I don't know. My hopes aren't super high. I just want everyone in Starbreeze to be okay, the devs. And that's all I'm worried about. I've said this already. It's always the devs who suffer for the executive choices, whether it's the choices of the people making Payday 3 when it came out and it not releasing the way it should have done, or the choices of executives now pushing things to Baxter regardless of financial logic. I just worry for the devs. Simple as. So I'll keep you all posted on news as always. They have said there'll be a blog on Friday that will summarize these events, or at least talk about them a bit and maybe any conversations in between. So if the blog says the exact same stuff as I've said today, I won't make a video on it. Probably there won't be any need. But if there's even a couple of things I think that are worth talking about, I'll make a video even if it's short. So just keep an eye out on Friday if there's any news there. But thank you all for watching. I greatly appreciate it, and I will see you all very soon with some new content. Look after yourselves, stay safe, take care. See you in the next one.